My name is Cara, and this happened 3 years ago when I was 28 and had just moved into my first apartment alone. I want to give you some context about the circumstances because they matter for understanding how I ended up in the situation I was in. I had been in a relationship for 4 years. The breakup was not clean. It was the kind that happens slowly and then all at once, and by the time it was actually over there was a period of several months where my ex, whose name was Daniel, had difficulty accepting that it was finished. Not violent, not threatening in any explicit way, but persistent in a way that made me feel monitored even when he wasn't around. Phone calls at odd hours. Messages that were too long and too frequent. Showing up at places I was likely to be, always with a plausible explanation for why he happened to be there. Nothing I could point to and say this is harassment, but a pattern that my body registered even when my brain was still making excuses for it. When I moved into the new apartment, I did not tell him my address. I did not post it on social media. I told a small number of people who I trusted completely. The whole point of the new place was a clean start, not just from the relationship but from the feeling of being watched that had settled over the last year of it. I wanted a space that was only mine. A space he didn't know about. The apartment was on the second floor of a converted Victorian in a quiet neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a living room with windows that faced the street. I had been there for about 6 weeks when the first thing happened. I came home from work on a Wednesday evening and found a note tucked under my door. Not in the mailbox, not slid under the building's exterior door, under my specific apartment door, which meant whoever left it had gotten into the building and walked to the second floor. The note was a single line on a piece of white paper. It said, "I know where you are now." No signature. No other information. I stood in the hallway holding it and tried to think through the rational explanations. A prank. A misdirected note meant for another tenant. Something a previous occupant had left. I went through the building to see if any other door had a similar note. None did. I took a photo of the note, put it in a drawer, and told myself I would see if anything else happened before deciding what to do. 2 weeks later, I came home to find the exterior door of the building propped open with a small rock. This was unusual. The door had a self-closing mechanism and the tenants were careful about it. I removed the rock, let the door close, and went upstairs. Nothing appeared wrong in my apartment. Nothing was missing or disturbed. I checked every window, every lock. Everything was as I'd left it. I called the building manager and mentioned both incidents. She said she'd look into it and reminded me to make sure my door was always locked. A month after the note, I woke up at 2 in the morning to the sound of someone trying the handle of my apartment door. I want to describe this precisely. Not knocking, not an urgent neighbor with a problem, not someone who had the wrong door. The handle moved slowly, deliberately, in the way it moves when someone is testing whether it's locked rather than announcing themselves. I lay in bed completely still. The handle moved twice, paused, moved again, then stopped. I did not call out. I did not go to the door. I lay there with my phone in my hand and listened for another 10 minutes before I was certain no one was in the hallway. Then I called the police. They came, checked the building, found nothing. Recommended I install a chain lock, which I did the following morning. 3 days later, Daniel called me from a number I didn't recognize. He said he'd heard I had a new place and that he'd love to see it sometime. His voice was completely casual. The kind of casual that requires effort. I asked him directly, had he been to my apartment? He said no, of course not, he just meant sometime in the future. The conversation ended quickly and I spent the next hour sitting in my kitchen trying to decide what I knew versus what I could prove. What I knew was that someone had left a note under my door, propped the exterior open, and tested my lock at 2 in the morning. What I knew was that Daniel had a history of showing up in places I was likely to be. What I knew was that his call coming 3 days after the lock test was not a coincidence I could comfortably accept. What I could prove was nothing. I filed a police report anyway. I documented everything, the note, the propped door, the call, the dates and times. The officer who took my report was thorough and took it seriously. He said without evidence of a specific threat there wasn't much they could do, but that the documentation was important if anything else happened. It happened 2 weeks later. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard footsteps on the fire escape outside my bedroom window. My bedroom was at the back of the building. The fire escape was accessible from the alley below, which meant someone could climb it without being visible from the street. I turned off the kitchen light and stood completely still. The footsteps stopped. I could see through the bedroom doorway that the window was dark, no shadow, no movement visible. I dialed 911. The dispatcher stayed on with me while the officers responded. When they arrived, they found the window screen had been partially lifted from the outside. Not fully removed, partially lifted, far enough that someone had tried to assess whether the window was locked. The window was locked. The lock held. They found boot prints in the alley below consistent with someone having stood at the base of the fire escape for an extended period. They dusted the screen for prints. Nothing usable came back from the lab. I moved out of that apartment the following month. I did not tell anyone new address except 3 people. I have not heard from Daniel since the day of that phone call. I don't know if it was him. I have never been able to prove it was him. What I know is that after I moved, after I closed the loop on that address, nothing like this happened again. The phone calls stopped. The feeling of being monitored stopped. The particular quality of dread that had settled over those months lifted gradually and then completely. Proof is a legal standard. Knowing is something else. I know what I know. I have a chain lock and a door alarm on every place I've lived since. I installed a camera that covers the fire escape before I moved anything into my current apartment. My friends think I'm overly cautious. They don't know what it's like to lie in the dark at 2 in the morning listening to your door handle move. Once you know what that sounds like, you don't stop preparing for it. My name is Joel, and I want to be honest with you at the start about something that matters for this story. I am not a person who scares easily. I'm 31 now, and I have lived alone since I was 22. I have stayed in empty buildings, worked overnight shifts in warehouses, camped alone in places without cell service. I understand that houses make sounds and that the dark is just the dark, and that the brain is very good at constructing threats from nothing when you give it too much quiet and not enough stimulation. I say this because what happened to me in the house I was renting in Knoxville, Tennessee is not something I have been able to explain away. I have tried. I have gone through every rational option available to me, and there is one detail at the end of this story that none of those options can account for. I want to get to that detail. But I need you to understand the setup first. I was house sitting for my friend Marcus. He and his wife had gone to visit family in California for 2 weeks, and they needed someone to watch the place, water the plants, make sure nothing went wrong. Their house was a 2-story craftsman on a quiet street, nothing unusual about it, not old in any particularly ominous way, not isolated. Normal neighborhood, normal house. Marcus had shown me around before they left. Upstairs was 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. Downstairs was the living room, kitchen, and a small home office. I was to sleep in the guest room on the first floor because it was set up for guests, and the master upstairs was Marcus and his wife's private space. I respected that. I slept downstairs the entire time. The first week was uneventful. I settled into a routine, worked from the home office during the day, cooked dinner, watched something on TV, went to sleep. The house was comfortable and quiet. I liked it. On the 9th night I woke up at 1:30 in the morning. I am a heavy sleeper. Waking at 1:30 for no reason is not something that happens to me normally. I lay in the dark for a moment trying to identify what had pulled me out of sleep. The house was quiet. I started to drift back when I heard it. Footsteps. Upstairs. Not ambiguous, not the settling and cracking of an old house, which I know how to identify. Footsteps. The specific, rhythmic, weighted sound of someone walking across a floor. Crossing from one side of the space above me to the other. Pausing. Walking back. I sat up and listened. The footsteps continued for about 30 seconds, stopped, then started again in a slightly different pattern, shorter steps, back and forth across what I estimated was the area above the master bedroom. Then they stopped completely. I sat in the dark for a long time. I went through the lists. Raccoon in the attic, possible, but raccoons don't make a sound that's this clearly bipedal, and waited. The house settling, possible if the house were 60 years older and made of different materials. Marcus coming home early, I had his itinerary, he wasn't due back for 5 more days. A break-in, the doors were locked, the windows on the ground floor were locked, and the sound wasn't consistent with someone moving through a space they were unfamiliar with. It was too calm, too even, too much like someone who knew exactly where they were going. I called Marcus. He answered on the 3rd ring, and I apologized for the hour and told him what I was hearing. He was quiet for a moment and then said that shouldn't be possible. I asked if there was anyone who had a key. He said his neighbor Helen had an emergency key, but that she would absolutely not come inside at 1:30 in the morning without calling first. I asked if I should call the police. He said yes, and that he was going to call Helen just to confirm it wasn't her. I called 911. The dispatcher was calm and told me to stay where I was and not go upstairs. 2 officers arrived in 11 minutes. I unlocked the front door for them from the outside. I had gone out the back and stood in the yard while I waited, which felt more defensible than sitting in a first-floor room with a single interior door between me and whatever was above me. The officers cleared the house. Both floors, every room, every closet, the attic access panel. Nothing. No one. The windows upstairs were all locked from the inside. The doors were all locked. There was no sign of entry, no sign of disturbance, nothing to indicate another person had been in the building. Marcus called back while the officers were still there. He had reached Helen. She had the key. She had not been in the house. She had not been out that night. She confirmed it clearly, and Marcus confirmed she had no reason to lie about it. The officers were professional and thorough and ultimately told me that old houses made sounds and that the acoustics between floors could do strange things. They were not dismissive, they did not treat me like I was imagining it, but they had nothing to point to. They left. I went back inside and sat in the kitchen with every light on until morning. Here is the detail I cannot explain. When Marcus came home and I described what I had heard, the specific path of the footsteps, the pattern of the movement, back and forth across the space above the master bedroom, his face changed. I noticed it immediately. He didn't say anything for a moment, and when I asked him what was wrong, he told me that his wife had a habit, a specific unconscious habit that she'd had for years. When she couldn't sleep, she got up and paced back and forth across the same section of the master bedroom floor. The same path, the same rhythm, the same pattern, every time. His wife had been in California. She was in California when I heard those footsteps. I had never stayed in that house before, had never seen her pace, had no knowledge of that habit before Marcus told me. I have no explanation for this. Marcus doesn't either. His wife doesn't either. We have talked about it multiple times over the past 2 years, and none of us have found a way to make it make sense. I finished the house sitting. I stayed the remaining 5 nights. I slept with every light in the guest room on, and I did not hear the footsteps again. Marcus and his wife still live in that house. She still paces when she can't sleep. I have not stayed there again. Not because I'm afraid exactly. More because there are some things that don't need to be examined more closely than once. You hear it, you can't explain it, you file it under the category of things that happen that you don't have the tools to understand. I filed it there and I left it there. But I think about it every time I'm in a house alone at night and I hear something from above me that I can't immediately identify. I think about it in a specific way you think about something that changed the shape of what you're willing to believe. Which is to say, a lot. My name is Piper, and I was 16 when this happened, home alone on a Saturday afternoon in November while my parents were at my aunt's house about an hour away. I want to be clear before I get into it that I was not the kind of teenager who got spooked by being home alone. I had been left by myself for weekends at a time by then, and it had never once bothered me. I was independent and had good instincts about people. My mom always said I had a built-in radar for when something was off. That radar was working correctly the afternoon I'm about to describe. I just didn't listen to it as quickly as I should have. Our house was a split level in a suburb outside Cincinnati. The kind of neighborhood where you knew your neighbors by name, waved from driveways, left packages on each other's porches when someone wasn't home. It was a safe, familiar, well-lit neighborhood. Not the kind of place where you expected anything to happen. At around 2 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. A man I didn't recognize was standing on the porch. Middle-aged, wearing a flannel shirt and a baseball cap, holding what looked like a small package. He looked like the kind of person who could plausibly be anyone, a delivery driver, a neighbor I hadn't met, someone from my parents' social circle I'd never been introduced to. I asked who it was. He said he was Jim, from down the street, and then he had a package that had been delivered to his house by mistake. He held it up so I could see it. The address label on the package had our house number on it. I opened the door. I want to be very precise about what happened in the next few seconds because the order of it matters. He handed me the package, I took it, and while my attention was on the package and not on him, he stepped forward. Not into the house, not past the threshold, but close enough that when I looked up he was closer than he had been. I stepped back automatically and he smiled and said sorry and asked if my parents were home. I said my mom was inside. He nodded slowly and said that was great, he'd been meaning to introduce himself anyway, could he come in for a minute? I said she was busy right now. He said it would only take a second. I said maybe another time and started to close the door. He put his hand on the door frame. Not on the door, on the frame, on my side of it, so that closing the door would have meant hitting his hand. He did it casually, almost unconsciously, like he was just steadying himself. But it meant I couldn't close the door without a confrontation. He kept talking, something about how he'd lived on the street for years and it was funny he'd never properly met our family, and while he talked he was looking past me into the house. Not at me. Past me. Taking inventory. My radar went from slightly elevated to fully active in about 3 seconds. I said I really had to go and I pulled the door toward me firmly enough that his hand had to move or get caught. He moved it. He smiled again and said of course, no rush, he'd catch us another time. He walked back down the front path and turned in the direction of the street. I locked the door. Both locks, top and bottom. Put the chain on. Went to the living room window and watched until I saw him reach the end of the path and turn left down the sidewalk. Then I called my mom. She picked up immediately and I told her everything, the package, the questions about whether anyone was home, the hand on the door frame, the way he looked past me into the house. She was quiet while I talked and when I finished she said she was coming home. Not in an hour. No. She said do not open the door for anyone and call 911 if anything else happens. She was home in 50 minutes. My dad called every neighbor he knew on both sides of the street. None of them had ever heard of anyone named Jim. No one knew who the man was. The package was real. It was something my mom had ordered and it had genuinely been delivered to the wrong address. But the return path of that package, from wherever it was delivered to our front door at 2 p.m. on a Saturday while I was home alone, was not something any of our actual neighbors could account for. The police came. They took a description. They said they would increase patrols in the area. We had a security camera installed the following week and my parents established a protocol for when my sister and I were home alone, a code word in texts, check-ins every hour, always say a parent is home. We never saw that man again. No one ever identified him. What stays with me is the package. It was real. My mom's name and our address were on it. Which means either he intercepted it somehow or he found it at a neighbor's house and recognized an opportunity, saw our address, saw the time, saw the quiet house, and made a decision. The hand on the door frame is what I think about most. Not aggressive, not threatening, just place. The casual confidence of someone who had done this before. Someone who knew exactly how much force to use to make it impossible to close without a scene. I am 26 now and I have never opened a door to someone I don't recognize when I'm alone. Not since that afternoon. I look through the peephole and if I don't know who's there I call out that I'm not able to come to the door right now. I don't say I'm alone. I don't say who else is home. I say I'm not available. My friends think I'm unfriendly. I think about the hand on the door frame. My name is Reed and this happened about 2 years ago when I was working night shifts at a distribution center and my wife Lena was home alone 3 nights a week while I was at work. I need to start by telling you about Lena because who she is matters for understanding the story. Lena is one of the most self-possessed people I have ever known. She grew up in a rural part of Wisconsin where being capable and unsentimental was just the default mode of operating, and she carried that into her adult life. She is not someone who calls me at work over nothing. She is not someone who panics or catastrophizes. In 4 years of marriage I can count on one hand the times she has called me urgently about something. So when she called me at 2:15 in the morning on a Tuesday telling me to come home I didn't ask questions. I told my supervisor I had a family emergency and I left. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what Lena told me happened before I got there. She had gone to bed around 11, which was her usual time on nights I worked. We lived in a townhouse, 2 floors, attached on one side to a neighbor's unit, a small enclosed patio in the back with a wooden fence that opened to the alley. Lena had checked all the locks before bed, which she did every night as a matter of habit. Front door, back patio door, ground floor windows. She was systematic about it. She fell asleep quickly and woke up at around 1 a.m. to what she described as a feeling rather than a sound, the specific sensation of the air in the house being different. She had felt this once before, years ago, when she had accidentally left a window open overnight and the temperature had dropped. The house felt occupied in a way it hadn't when she fell asleep. She lay still and listened. The house was quiet. She told me later that what she should have done at that point was call me immediately. But she talked herself out of it because she couldn't point to anything concrete, and she didn't want to make me drive 40 minutes home based on a feeling. So instead she got up to check. She went from the bedroom to the hallway, stopped, listened. Nothing. She went downstairs and checked the front door, locked. Checked the patio door, locked. Checked the ground floor windows, all latched. She was standing in the kitchen deciding she'd imagined it when she saw the chair. We had a wooden kitchen chair that lived against the wall near the back door. That chair was in the center of the kitchen floor. Not pushed slightly out of place, positioned in the center of the room, facing the doorway to the hallway that led to the stairs. Like someone had moved it there deliberately and sat in it, facing the direction of the stairs. Facing the direction of the bedroom. Lena did not investigate further. She went to the bathroom, locked the door, called me. I drove home in 35 minutes. When I pulled into the street, Lena was standing on the front porch in her coat with the door locked behind her. She had not gone back inside after she locked herself in the bathroom. She had stayed there until I called to say I was 5 minutes away. I went through the house while she stayed outside. Every room, every closet, under both beds, the patio, the alley visible from the fence. Nothing. No one. All the locks still engaged, no sign of how anyone had gotten in or out. But the chair was in the center of the floor. I hadn't moved it. Lena hadn't moved it. No one else had been in that house. I called the police and they came and they were thorough and they found nothing. The officer who spoke to us after the search was honest. He said he didn't have an explanation for the chair, but that without evidence of forced entry there wasn't much to act on. He recommended a security system and a camera for the back patio, which we installed the following week. I want to tell you the thing that bothers me most about this, and it is not the chair itself, as unsettling as that is. The thing that bothers me most is the timing. I work Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday nights. Always. My schedule has been the same for 18 months. Whoever moved that chair did it on a Tuesday night. The night Lena was alone. I don't know how someone would know my schedule. I don't broadcast it. Our immediate neighbors know I work nights, but not which nights specifically. And yet whoever came into that house, however they got in and however they got out without leaving any trace, came on a Tuesday. A night when Lena was alone. Which means they knew. Which means they had either been watching the house long enough to learn the pattern, or they had access to information about our routine that I don't understand how they could have. Lena works from home now. She has for the past year and a half, but the timing matters. She switched to remote work about 3 months after this happened, and I would be lying if I said the two things were unrelated. She hasn't said that directly. She doesn't need to. I know her. We moved out of that townhouse 8 months ago. The security system came with us to the new place, and I added a camera in the kitchen, not in every room, just the kitchen. Pointed at the chair, which has stayed against the wall, where it belongs, in every place we've lived since. I check it when I come home. Every time. I know that sounds like something a person with a problem does. But I drove home at 2 in the morning once and found my wife standing on the front porch in her coat because she wouldn't go back inside, and I went through a house that should have been empty and found a chair sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor facing the stairs. Once you find a chair in the wrong place, you check that it's in the right place. Every time. Without deciding to. That's just how it goes now. For accounts. For homes. Nobody ever identified, nobody ever found. If these stayed with you, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next ones are already waiting.